All right, folks. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Unit 5, Chapter 9. The idea with this is simple, almost kind of. We're looking at a few different presidents. We're looking at Madison, who is pretty important. We're going to look at Monroe in here. We're going to look at John Quincy Adams. But the person that really sets the stage for this is actually Thomas Jefferson, because he is that person with that Republican ideal. And really what he's working on is when he takes office, he thinks that the government, the federal government, is too large. And so his objective as president is to make sure that he cuts back on the government itself. And so what he does is he cuts back on taxes, he cuts back on the military to eliminate that standing army. He cuts back on the federal government a whole bunch. So when we get eventually, as we move presidents forward, he leaves office and we end up with Madison taking over. Jefferson has left us on the precipice. He's left us on the edge of what becomes the War of 1812. And that War of 1812 is huge because we're not ready for it. We're not ready for it. And as we talked about in class, the only reason why we actually survived that war is no, we don't win that war. We survive. We outlast the British. It's too expensive for the British to maintain the war. There's nothing for them to be gained by the war. And they're really busy fighting the French because they've been fighting the French all along. And so that's kind of important stuff. They're dealing with the French. They're dealing with Napoleon, and we're just an annoyance. What happens with this is kind of important because we're going to put a series of tariffs into place. Jefferson will do that. Madison will follow up with that. We'll get involved in the war. Andrew Jackson's going to get his claim to fame here because as first a militia general and then an actual general, he is going to win some battles against the Native Americans. He is going to go down and his troops will beat up on the Red Sticks. And eventually he is going to be the general that wins his claim to fame in the Battle of New Orleans, which of course we know takes place after the actual end of the war, but again, we don't have instantaneous communication. So, he defeats the British, but that's going to be part of his claim to fame, that and the great Indian fighter. And so what's going to happen is we're going to shift. The War of 1812 is an awful, terrible, terrible, rotten, very good thing. Wars, people die. Wars are mean, nasty, they're brutish. I'm sure if you've read Hobbes and his philosophy, he would tell you the natural state of man is awful like that. But the thing is wars are really great for business. Anytime we have a war, it's good for business. And so what happens with this War of 1812 is we're going to cut off trade with Britain. We get most of our manufactured goods from Britain. And so when we quit trading with them, it's going to force us into the Industrial Revolution. It's going to force us to mechanize. It's going to force us to industrialize. And so what will happen is it will be the birth of industry here in the United States. It's going to create textile mills. We start to get the Lowell mills at this particular point. Lowell as in Lowell, not LOL, because that's a whole different Lowell. But the idea being is that we get the birth of industry here, which is a really good thing and a really awful thing, because we get the Industrial Revolution here. And the Industrial Revolution works out well for us because what it does is allows us to build industry, allows us to go ahead and build manufacturing, and that's a good thing. But what will happen from that is it's going to push sectionalism. It's going to push a division between agriculture and industry. What we're going to look at with this is important because what will happen is we get the introduction of John C. Calhoun here. We get the introduction of James Madison. We get the introduction of a few other folks like Henry Clay. But what we're looking at is we're looking at a division. We discussed Marbury versus Madison in actual class when we were still sitting in there. And so I'm not going to get into much in the way of judicial review. I'm not going to talk much about Chief Justice John Marshall. But the idea is that we're looking at an evolution in government. The evolution in government is part of our evolution as a people, evolution as a nation. If you look at the study guide, you'll see it talks about internal improvements, it talks about the Cumberland Road, it talks about the American system, and there's two American systems, and I want you to remember that. What we're looking at is we're looking at a spread west. Because Jefferson makes that whole Louisiana Purchase, it spreads us farther and farther west. We know there's a faction that doesn't want people to move west. We know there's a faction that does want people to move west. The idea being, as we expand westward, we want to increase trade with the western part of the United States. And to do that, we need to facilitate some changes. So the internal improvements are things like the Cumberland Road. The idea being is they want to build a system of roads. That's called the American system of roads. You have people in the north that are very much about that. They want to increase trade, they want to increase travel, because that increases the ability for people to purchase, the ability to people to trade goods. The South could care less. They can do most of their shipping via the Mississippi, or they can do it by boats. They don't have to do much in the way of internal shipping. So what's going to happen is we're going to level this tariff of 1816. We're going to level a few more tariffs. Not only is it going to protect industry, but they want it to provide money to the government to provide internal improvements. And the South is going to cop an attitude and say, okay, well, how does that benefit us? Well, I want you to remember that there's more than just the North and the South, because we're also going to look at the West, because the West is going to be a growing section. And here's what we look at. We start to divide. The West wants to trade. They want to trade with the North and the South. The North wants to be able to trade into manufacture. The South wants to be able to go ahead and just be left the heck alone, so they can graze, they can grow, they can make money. And so we're going to start looking at the division. What you have to also look at is the change in industry. When we are hit with this industrial revolution, we're going to get some key characters. One of those is going to be Robert Fulton. Robert Fulton is going to be responsible for the modern, or what is at that point, the modern steamboat engine. He's going to create traffic up and down the river rather than just down the river. Being able to take goods up and down the river rather than just down the river is going to be a huge evolution in trade. But it's not just the steamboat. The other thing we start to look at is Eli Whitney and his innovations in the cotton gin. He's going to change the idea that we can now manufacture much more cotton. We can treat much more cotton. We can gin is what the cotton gin does. It allows us to process cotton so that now we can grow a variety of different kinds of cotton. It used to be that black seed cotton, that high quality cotton with the fewer burrs and the fewer seeds, that was grown in small areas. Now we can grow what's called the green seed cotton. There's a lot more burrs, there's a lot more seeds. It's a lower quality cotton, but it grows like weeds. It'll grow anywhere. Now that we've got the cotton gin, and Eli Whitney's idea, the cotton gin is to manufacture something that's going to make life easier on the slaves. Doesn't work out that way, unfortunately for him. What it does, it allows them to go ahead and process 10 times the amount of cotton with a third of the amount of slaves. And so it actually makes their lives much worse. It actually takes and makes slavery more profitable. And so it also forces it to spread, and this, allows it to spread. It allows it to spread throughout the South, allows it to spread into the Southwest. And so what we're looking at is a larger division between the North and the South, because as we spread west, what we're looking at is a larger representation in Congress between the slave states versus the northern non-slave states, or the free states. And so we're looking at a division here as well at this particular point. And so we're starting to fight this out in Congress. One of the things that comes up in this particular section is called the Missouri Compromise. And I want you to take a look at that, because what it is, we're at the point now where we're trying to keep our government leveled out. We're trying to keep the slave states versus the free states leveled out. And the idea is this is a big part of that discussion about how to keep the balance of power. And so there's a few different compromises that come up. The last thing I wanted to mention that is going to be the Monroe Doctrine. And Monroe Doctrine is going to be important because James Monroe is going to bring that up. And that's going to develop one of our first international stances. And that's important, this international stance on what's happening. And so what I want you to do is make sure you pay attention to that as well. All right, my 10 minutes is up, so I'm going to let you go. Make sure you do the research, folks.